Let's track me. Thank you very much. So we're back. This is part two of Disarticulations 12. We are where we are pushing ahead with our interview with Isabelle, Gare, and Sauvagnargues. I just want to move ahead a little bit further. And in OBS, I was fucking around. I couldn't figure out. Sorry, excuse my French. How to uh, get our live chat up and running. So I think on the first podcast for tonight, I actually missed some of the roads, so I apologize. So I'm gonna put on my. It's not like we have thousands of messages, but I think most of the big podcasters use AI algorithms to make it look they have constant messages. I have no doubt about that. So I'm here. I apologize. Is it going to show up on our live chat? I don't think so because. Okay, I'm here. I apologize. Let's say, please write for any question or issue. So if you have questions, shoot. We will do our best. And I've already translated. So those few who have followed us, we looked into the question too. That was Anne Sauvagnargues, and we only looked at the first part of her answer, and we will get into the rest of her answer. Deleuze and Guattari first play Reich against Marcuse. What counts is that our desire can be fascist as well as revolutionary, with humans fighting for their enslavement as if it were their liberation, as Le Boetie and Spinoza said about voluntary servitude. So I'm overlapping a little bit. You heard that in the podcast before, but it's just to kind of get us back into the organism, let's call it, and we're getting into new territory. So we no longer have the molar opposition between a good desire, individual and revolutionary, and a bad social coding that oppresses individual freedom. Desire is no longer spontaneous. It is constructed through and through by social coding, which is why it is called a desiring machine, coding on a flow. So here we are getting heavily into the vocabulary used in l'anti-Oedipe, and let me go to my live chat because I'm going to write questions. I'm sending out questions with you. What would you consider a flow to be? Oh my goodness, sorry. The keyboard, a flow to be. So my question to our followers is, what would you consider a flow to be according to Deleuze and Guattari? Anne is saying, with Deleuze and Guattari and the anti-Oedipe, desire is no longer an issue of being spontaneous. No, I desire X, I desire Y, I desire a Ferrari, I desire this beautiful person, I desire the sea, I desire, etc., etc., etc. Is no longer spontaneous. It is constructed through and through by social coding. So once again, I don't want to lose too much time because Anti-Oedipus is very, very difficult. And I would repeat that, in my opinion, the issue of flows, in my opinion, is more on the Guattari part, and what Deleuze's main concern was to make that consistent with the Spinozian system of substance, attributes, and modes. And we all know that Deleuze's one of his very few criticisms of Spinoza was that he, not a criticism, but he said Spinoza just had this last step where he had to push substance around the nodes. So you'd no longer have a tripartite system, substance, attributes, and nodes. You would have a system much more fluid, like the Deleuze system, with the actual and the virtual. So Anne goes ahead saying desire is called a desiring machine because it is no longer, let's say, pure, spontaneous. It is constructed through and through by social coding. So I'll give you a quick example, and I'll make a confession. No, I have to be very careful here. This is not a confession at all, but throughout the years, I have found Monica Bellucci, the Italian actor, very attractive. No, but is that a spontaneous, raw, pure desire that I have for her, or is that an effect of a desiring machine and a social coding machine? What does that mean? That means, have I ever met Monica Bellucci? No. Many years ago, when she was a model, she was, I looked at her pictures in Vogue or for Chanel, and icon of beauty. No, oh my God, that's so beautiful. That's my desire. I desire. Oh my God, Monica. If I have to be perfectly honest, I watched some films and understood that Monica was really not a good actress, and I won't go. I don't want to talk bad of people, but she's very attractive, but not a very good actress, let's say. But she appeared in Matrix 2, Persephone, I believe, and she was kind of, cool, very attractive. So this is just one example amongst thousands for me. I could just sit there and say, oh, Monica Bellucci is a pure, raw desire that I have. But is that really true? Or was there a whole social coding machine that did, extremely expensive photo shoots and built her up and put her into, in the beginning, movies in Italy, and then later cameo roles in Hollywood? Because I repeat, I don't think she was too much up to the task. But the big question here is that my raw desire, or is that my raw desire that has been coded through a desiring machine, which is inherently social. No? If I'd seen, for example, let's say in the multiverse, we've already talked that we don't believe in the multiverse, but let's just say in another reality, in another world, I meet Monica Bellucci, who is not a famous actress. She studies astrophysics. She wears no makeup. She didn't do all the lifting. She has a big nose. No, she has big cheeks. She's not dressed up in Dior every day. How would desire work in that kind of circumstance? So I'm just trying to give you a really silly, stupid example of what Anne, pardon, is talking about here. So this is a very, very important point, and I do not necessarily agree with this. I repeat again, this is stuff that you readers, passionate readers, young philosophers, you're going to answer this if you're interested in maybe a new kind of way. But Anne is saying quite clearly that, following my example with our dear Monica, that desire is coding, not flow. And this is very important, and it comes from Lacan. So, like I said before, in L'Antiedipe, I think they're, just kind of like skeet shooting at Freud, who's an easy target, but just to prove a point in that they're moving from structuralism to post-structuralism. The relationship with Lacan is much, much more complicated, but because Lacan had worked very much on these same kind of subjects. So desire is coding, not flow. And it's for me, it's I'll give you a second example and we'll move on. On my live chat, I'm going to say no answer. Maybe I'll get some kind of AI program who will talk to me, and I can make believe that people are interested. What, in your opinion, is the relationship between I'm going to write a pure flow, I'm introducing that, and a coded flow. And then I'm going to add a second question. Do you think, or I will just say today, that a pure flow, and I'm going to add, in terms of desire, exists? Because obviously those viewers, my question mark on this keyboard, we all know that the Antiedipe begins with flows of pissing and shitting and eating and mother's milk from the breast. So, they're essentially defining the real, the actual, in terms of flows everywhere. That talked about, I don't remember where, but Deleuze flows of haircuts, hairstyles, no? It's a flow. You bob, weave, ponytail, bob, weave, that's a flow. They're proposing that the actual can be interpreted exclusively in terms of flows in the Antiedipe. So with Lacan and against Freud, desire is coded by the unconscious, which functions like a language. And here we are getting into extremely complicated issues. The unconscious, this is, I apologize, cigarette time, very late over here. The unconscious is not private, individual, but social. So right here, Anne gives us very justly so, she gives a definition of the conscious. The unconscious, or our unconscience or unconsciousness, is not at all private and individual. It's social, and it's not familial, meaning it doesn't belong to a family. It's not built around the individual's parental figures. Okay, so another extremely important point. I'm going to write this on the live screen. That according to Anne's Sauvagnargues interpretation of Deleuze and Guattari, and also late Lacan, the I don't know if I can spell that, conscience, I'm going to put equals social. equals social. So that means you, me, everybody are unconsciousness, no? Belongs to the socius. What happens there is produced in the socius. It's not individual. It's not you. It's not your families. It's not your parents. And obviously we can see this radical break from Freud here. Big time radical break from Freud, who would maintain that is essentially parental, that your traumas come essentially from your parents. And here we're widening the scope of the unconsciousness on a much, much, much wider scale. So, but with Marx this time, and against Lacan, language is not enough to encode the unconsciousness, or the unconscious, excuse me. So once again, but with Marx this time, and against Lacan, and this is another very, very interesting point, language is not enough to encode the unconscious. First of all language implies a regime of production that is no longer symbolic or structural. Here we return to the polemic against structure, which is in full force against Lacan's theory of the signifier. The unconscious is machinic, not so much coded as machinic. It is not expressed in abstract mathemes or in some unconscious language for specialists. So, once again, I'm not going to go too deep here, otherwise we could pass at least a couple of hours analyzing this, but I think the main point is that there's not this mysterious abstract language that we have to discover, like I think even Peirce, who Deleuze, like Helmslev, sorry, but we're talking about Peirce, were a kind of linguists that Deleuze and Guattari were kind of, how do you call it, lean on a little bit. But Peirce, for example, was a true believer that there was some kind of underlying language in the unconscious. I think Noam Chomsky is the same. It's just a question of discovery, you know. And then here we're saying that the unconscious is not so much coded as it is machinic. There's no unconscious secret language for specialists where we can discover the magic Kool-Aid that makes our unconsciousness work. You cannot explain the unconscious with language. So for the tripartition, symbolic, imaginary, real, this is Jacques Lacan, which Lacan redeploys the three Freudian instances of superego, ego, and ID, rationalizing in logical places the still psychological Freudian topic, individualized on the figures of the family, the parental superego, the civilized ego, the ID to the id, not ID, my apologies, the id, to be educated, responds to a determined mode of production and can only be understood according to the historically determined mode of a social mode of production. Sounds complicated, but this part is really, it is complicated, but you should be able to figure this out. I have very much faith in those people following us and young people interested in this. And so Uh, let's go. So Lacan essentially is creating the concepts of or ideas, notions, whatever, symbolic, imaginary, real, which substitute the Freudian superego, ego, and id. Um, and tends to rationalize in logical places. Like, let's say where Lacan had gaps, he would fall back on Freud, and this was true because also Lacan never de-emphasized the importance of the family in young stage psychosis or cases of paranoia. So Lacan is not the same, but does agree with Freud that the youth, the early years of a child within the family is indeed a very important phase in their lives. He does not deny that. And so then, like we said, Lacan will create the parental superego, the civilized ego, and the id to be educated, but it responds to a determined mode of production and can only be understood according to the historically determined mode of a social mode of production. The I was about to say Vietnamese, the Viennese family, which Freud takes to be man's nature. So Freud is Austrian from Vienna. So Freud obviously worked in Vienna, and he assumed that the family in Austria, Vienna, in that time was universal. And she says, I do mean man's nature. Oedipus is masculine centric. And yes, the role of Oedipus, obviously with Freud and even with Lacan, it is the patriarchal figure that is kind of the protagonist in everything, no? So Freud and Lacan will repeat the same thing. The father is the figure of authority, and we can call that patriarchal, no? The father, for a child, represents authority. At the same time, he represents the phallus, and the phallus is the symbol of authority. So, in the case of Lacan, I'm going to generalize to not lose too much time because we're skipping all over the place. But the point is, we have to kind of construct this kind of multiplicity, in our minds, where this whole issue with Marx, you can't do it by itself. It has to be tied into all of the historical factors. So, like, Marx was not brought in to France purely as Marx. Maybe earlier, yes, but maybe with Althusser. But when you come, if you're interested in Deleuze and Guattari, you have to accept the fact that there's big multiplicity where we're talking about Marx, production, Freud, Lacan. It's you just have to accept the multiple nature of this whole thing. So what we know here is the importance of history, because obviously, very easy to explain, is that obviously in Vienna, in 19th century Vienna, in Austria, the model of the family already was not universal. No, obviously families in around the world were completely different. No, families in Italy, families in Turkey, families in China. It's not a universal model, which Freud believed it to be, because familial structures differed. But however, they do differ over history, and that's going to be one point from Deleuze and Guattari is that, like, just look at today. It's easy to understand. If you're back in Freud's time, no, you're going to have the father who is wearing a beautiful knit wool suit, and he will work, and he will be a severe fatherly authority, the patriarchy. The mother will kind of be normally, this is not always the case, but it's just typical. That the mother will kind of all be dressed up, but she will be kind of the slave to the father, and he will come home and smoke his pipe, and she will prepare dinner, and she will take care of the children, and the children will recognize their father as an object of authority, and the children will turn to their mother for nurturing, for tenderness, whatever. And the mother will reject them, and then according to Lacan, the child will recognize that his phallus is not as big. Sorry to get into the corn details, but it's not as big as his father's. Therefore, trauma. Then the mirror phase, blah blah blah. So, okay, that's all relative to a Viennese family in 19th century. Think about today. I mean, families are disintegrating, divorces everywhere. Marriage is less and less, an acceptable social norm. All kinds of stuff. I mean, the traditional family has disintegrated, and I'm not commenting on that. I'm saying the family over time in history has always changed, and it will always change. It's in what Deleuze would call a becoming, no? I believe you will have some kind of, hopefully, family unit, but, the Oedipal triangle, mommy, daddy, the dirty secret of sex, and, the infant is changes historically, and that's an important point. So, Ang goes ahead and said, I do mean man's nature. Oedipus is masculine centric, and we just explained that. This is maybe today we have marriages in which it's complicated. I don't want to talk about that, but maybe when you have the parental, the fatherly authority is eliminated, no? And I don't know if that's like an issue of gender, no? It's like if I say if we have lesbian couples that have children, everything will be cool because we have eliminated the father. There's no male and therefore no patriarchy. But I don't believe that. I believe it depends on the person, no? You can have women who are equally as patriarchal as men. You could also have a gay male marriage in which you have two parents who are renounce this kind of patriarchal role, and they're both nurturing. The same if you have two, it just depends, and that's kind of the point. So we have this is the crux of Deleuze and Guattari's critique of psychoanalysis. It must stop understanding the unconscious as a theater in which parental figures express themselves. I would just add, I absolutely agree, but this is more Freud than late Lacan. But it's Freud and also early Lacan. So in our consciousness, when we close our eyes at night and we dream or we have nightmares, it's not just like a theater we're watching and playing out the traumas we received, when we were infants. No, it's quite the opposite. What they call the daddy mommy unconscious. The unconscious doesn't delve into the family, but into the entire social field. And this is one of the great points of the Anti-Oedipa. And I personally, I find that so liberating. I do believe, yes, the family, the residue of the family is there, but at the same time, it's going to delve into the entire social field. It's a factory not a theater. And hence, like we said before, this is the role of Marx, because Marx says that production is a factory, and this is and I think in that era, so many psychoanalysts, intellectuals were looking for some kind of model towards the unconscious. Is it just like Freud says, a repetition of your childhood trauma, or is early Lacan, is it difficult to comprehend, but fundamentally has its own meta language, which we may not understand, but which is structural, therefore eternal, has always been the same from the beginning to the end of time, etc., etc. No, this introduction to Marx and this idea of the evolution of technology became a really, really useful tool for so many of these thinkers. So Marx is the theoretical operator of schizoanalysis. Yeah, hang on. And that is a very interesting point, which I would keep in mind. The question is, if the unconscious is fundamentally social and the unconscious is productive, if the unconscious creates its own flows, and if the flows would be defined as flows only through the fact that they are being coded through the socius or the social field, therefore I think you can understand this kind of, in my opinion, bizarre relationship between Marx and psychoanalysis. So Marx is the theoretical operator of schizoanalysis. Very, very interesting. It's the social machine that codes the unconscious according to the mode of production of the bourgeois family. The unconscious has no timelessness like Feuerbach's cherry tree. There is no human nature, only historically determined production of social machines whose semiotic arrangements must be diagnosed. So once again, whose semiotic, sorry, when I highlight you can't see that, but whose semiotic arrangements must be diagnosed. And as she is going to say, the first thing that came to my mind is Karl Marx. How are you going to explain the actual machinery that produces the unconscious? No, is like we said before, is it a pre-existing language that has always existed? No, we've excluded that. No. Is it the family and youth traumas only? No, we've excluded that. So something is producing all the flows and the encoded flows and the coding of the flows in the unconscious. And that is fundamentally a social desiring machine. So as Anne says here, it's Marx who's being played off against Freud and Lacan. The unconscious is the historically determined production of a certain social machine, not an abstract grammar of math themes, a symbolic structure. Let me get rid of this. Anyway, I recommend, and I'm going to get rid of that because Google Translate gives me a very, very limited number of words, but DeepL, for free without paying, you can translate like, my camera goes like triple what you can do in Google. So I recommend for translations DeepL, which I think is better anyway, a better algorithm. And our last point here, I'm going to shut off, is that very important here, it's Marx who's being played off against Freud and Lacan. The unconscious is the historically determined production of a certain social machine. So this is very, very close to the philosophy of Karl Marx, not an abstract grammar of mathemes. We've talked about that. Not a symbolic structure. And she's saying still less a social machine, which I'm not sure if that's consistent or if it's an errant translation. But let me see if I can zoom out with my lovely camera. I think one more time here, it's Marx who's being played off against Freud and Lacan. The unconscious is the historically determined production of a certain social machine, not an abstract grammar of mathings, a symbolic structure, still less a social machine. I'm betting that last phrase, let me check, is going to be a translation error. I'm pretty sure. Where did we translate it? Anyway, in my opinion, I would ignore that last thing, still less a social machine, because obviously pardon, is saying before that historically determined production of social machines. So I'm going to check really quickly the original friend. Oh my God, check out the translation. That's crazy. Il est joué contre Freud et Lacan. L'on concerne la production instrument déterminé dans cette machine, non une grammaire. Haha, interesting. So this is my bad, but all big things have small beginnings, and once again, I've always talked about the extreme difficulty in translating not only Deleuze and Guattari, but many of these French texts into English. You have to be very, very careful. And just look, I was singing the praises of Deep Bell, and then look what happens. I am now translating. Where do we start with the unconsciousness? The unconsciousness. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all of this. And let's look at the translation of that last line. But I already intuited that. In English, this is the French. L'inconscient est la production historiquement déterminée d'une certaine machine sociale, non une grammaire abstraite de mathème, une structure symbolique, encore moins une réserve de fantasmes. So, this last line, encore moins, that means, if I had to translate, that would be the unconsciousness would be even less reserve, even less I would say a reserve. Reserve, nice writing, or I could even say a reservoir, same thing here, of phantasm. So basically we're talking about Freud or past trauma. So that's the answer in the original French text, and look at the translation I get from that. And what l'inconscient, the unconscious, is the historically et la production historiquement déterminée, all good, d'une certaine machine sociale, of a certain social machine. Super. Not an abstract grammar, non un grammaire abstrait de mathème. Perfect. But it translates this here a symbolic structure, still less a social machine. So our translator translated a réserve de fantasme, a reserve. Sorry, I'm missing a V. A reservoir of phantasms, which is perfectly consistent, translated into social machine, which I find bizarre. But the whole point is today we have all kinds of translation tools everywhere. But I repeat, I think if you want to, if you're really, really interested, I would pick up a little bit of French. It doesn't matter how much, how little, but just read some stuff in French. Who cares, no? And get a little bit used to the language. And once you get a little bit used to the language, you understand all the problems of translation. So I'm making fun of Deep L right now. But I repeat, I think the first and even second translation of the Anti-Oedipus in English uh, were severely lacking. Although I do appreciate, not naming names, the people that translated them. One of them, I think, was a French Canadian, therefore fluent in French, but it was something new that they had to do. Obviously, in a hurry, they had to get paid, etc., etc. So, but I've always maintained that the translations of those two are very poor, and they drain at least 25% of the l'esprit, of the spirit and sense of the book, by doing this kind of literal translation, just like we've seen right now, no? And like obviously the first two pages of Anti-Oedipus are filled with literary references. I mean, it's almost like opera. You have cadences. I mean, they're very. Deleuze is really, you know, how could you say, he's bringing out everything: the infantry, the cannons, the horseback soldiers, everything. No, I mean, it's really the first two pages in French are so eloquent. The translations in English, in both translations, are completely flat because they're missing the whole intentional, let me see, literary aspect of that. So, my advice to you is, obviously, this doesn't happen always. I'm sure that 90% of translations or stuff is all good. And but I think if you're into this stuff, it's good to get in a little bit into, but like the sense in an intuitive, where you just kind of feel out things. It can enrich for sure a lot of the work that you are doing and will be doing. So, super late. I hope, as always, that something useful occurred here tonight. Always a pleasure to speak about this. I hope I've not offended too many people, and look forward to meeting you next time, where we will keep plowing through this interview. We're almost finished, and I apologize that we spent so much time on it, but I think this is, like, if you're interested in these themes, this is a really great paper, and going through it is really worthwhile. So it should, if you're interested in these things, look into Isabelle Gare and Sauvagnargues, and it can't hurt. It can only help. So have a lovely Sunday for those over here. Enjoy the end of your Saturday on the other side of the Atlantic, and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Do note that in our icon, we did face swap this time, so you should be able to see Fidel and Karl in their original guises. So take care.